The best new feature on the new Steam Deck is not the OLED, it's not the battery life, it's not the better haptic feedback, it's not the clickier buttons. It's something very few people are talking about, but it's an actual game changer when it comes to actual gameplay on a day-to-day basis. Not just visuals, the real best feature of the new Steam Deck is the 90 hertz refresh rate, but the benefits go far beyond just being able to play games at higher FPS. I've done a lot of digging on this. Let me explain how truly awesome this upgrade is, especially for those of us who had the LCD model and made the upgrade. First of all, let's just get the basics out of the way when it comes to refresh rates and FPS or frames per second. Refresh rates of monitors and screens at large are expressed in hertz. So specifically, the number refers to how many times the screen updates the image every second. So in a 60 hertz monitor, the image on screen is refreshed 60 times per second. Remember that all video is just really simply a series of images. So as we move from image to image in general, the more times the screen refreshes these images, regardless of what's being shown, the smoother and more fluid motion will appear. So that being said, this smoothness is also dependent on the frame rate of the content, that coveted FPS in gaming. Frames per second just means how many images are being generated and outputted from the graphics card each second. Because again, videos are just a series of images. So your typical Nintendo Switch game on its 7-year-old hardware is usually going to run around 30 frames per second, right? Or 30 images being shown every single second. Hollywood movies are typically shot in 24 frames per second. It gives you that cinematic feel with more motion blur and stuff, whereas sports are often shown in 60 FPS or higher, so we can get as many of those images packed in as possible so we don't miss anything that happens or any little movements. So of course, when it comes to gaming, we all want our FPS as high as possible for the smoothest possible experience. The higher your frames per second, the smoother and faster feeling experience you have, but you can only actually experience those high frames per second if you have a monitor that matches it 1-to-1. So if you have a 60 hertz refresh rate screen and a game that's running 120 FPS, guess what? You're only getting 60 FPS because the monitor can't keep up. It can only refresh the image 60 times in a second. So all those other frames your graphics card's generating, they're just going to waste. So the Steam Deck LCD had a 60 hertz refresh rate, so you could never do better than 60 FPS, which is generally fine. The deck's hardware isn't going to run a ton of games at 60 FPS, even at lower settings, and it would eat the battery to death as well. But the OLED, oh, this is where the magic happens. That OLED screen is packing a 90 hertz refresh rate, and this has been truly the most pleasant surprise I have had with my deck, but not just for the obvious reasons. For one thing, I've been putting off playing Dragon's Dogma for years and decided to finally dig into it on my new deck. This 12-year-old game runs at a consistent 90 FPS for me most of the time on high settings, making it's just like the perfect game for the Steam Deck. And I'm just loving this experience. I'm working on an Is It Fun video on Dragon's Dogma, by the way. Hit that subscribe button if you want to get notified when that goes live. But here's the other thing, and it's something that a lot of folks are not talking about, or they rarely mention. Even if you have a game with, say, a 30 FPS refresh rate, that is running at 90 hertz on a 90 hertz monitor, you're going to have a smoother overall experience with less input lag than the same game running at 30 FPS on a 60 hertz monitor. Why? 90 divided by 30 is 3, which means the image is refreshing 3 times per frame. Even though these frames are the same to the eye, it can create a slightly smoother experience because the presentation of frames is more consistent. So it's not actually smoother, it's just more consistency. So this consistency can reduce the perception of stutter or irregular pacing in the display of frames, like when you have frame drops and things like that. They can otherwise occur, right, when the frame rate and refresh rate are not in sync with each other. And this is where technologies like G-Sync and stuff like that come in on gaming PCs. We're talking about the deck here, right? And of course, those of us who own a deck know that there is an amazing sweet spot at like 40 to 45 frames per second. It appears much smoother and less floaty than 30 FPS, even though it doesn't reach the coveted 60. On the old deck, we were stuck with a 1-to-1 FPS to refresh rate. But now, if you set your Steam Deck to 45 FPS cap, that it will automatically adjust it to 90 hertz. So what does that mean? It's going to double the amount of times that the images refresh, because remember we said 90 hertz, it's going to refresh each image 90 times in a second. And so if there's only 30 images, it's going to do each of them 3 times. And this overall makes games feel just a bit better and more consistent than they did on the LCD. And as Digital Foundry discovered, the input lag, meaning the time it takes from you pressing a button to something happening on the actual screen, has been reduced across the board, making things feel even more smooth and consistent. Hey, at the time of recording this video, I'm a tiny channel. Just starting. I'm a baby. A like on the video and a subscribe really helps me grow. Anyway, until next time, don't forget to have fun. See ya.